Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, fucking own, thank you so much. If you're new to this show and this channel, welcome. Hope you like what you see. If you do enjoy what you see, please make sure to hit like and subscribe on the way out so you can get notified when we do it again. And helps us out. It's a very passive gesture that goes a very long way. Also, we will be going to the champagne room this evening. Probably be by myself. Will warn you guys, I did watch another Tubi movie. I kind of want to tell you guys about the movie I watched. We may talk about that in the champagne room. And by we, I mean me and you guys. So, also, if you are a patron of the show, then you know there's a new feature that I just rolled out a few weeks back called the Crisis Papers, where around every week I'm trying to write an essay, not necessarily about what's going on, but what's going on in the crazy world of the people at TIR. And the most recent one is up called Ill Communication, Why I Hate AAVE. Check that out if you are a patron. Now, today we're going to talk about something that is not fun and festive. It's quite depressing. I was just on movie night extravaganza with my very good friend, Conan Neutron, and Andy, and it was Forrest's birthday show. So Forrest has been actually a big helper in this show for some of the graphics that we have. Forrest did, Jesus, like 3 years, maybe even 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So always, and that show used to be on this channel at one point in time until he got big enough. I think he's at a couple thousand subscribers now. And there's some really great guests on that show, some really good shows. They're talking right now about Starship Troopers. I was on for about the first hour. Really interesting movie. If you guys haven't watched it, check it out. It's a prescient film that was kind of slept on at the time. I think we were very apolitical in 1996 when that movie came out. Post 9/11, it has a very different meaning. And I think we're in a moment where we really don't get satire. That being said, let's talk about why you guys are here. Surveillance in schools. In an era where alienation and loneliness have become almost normalized, the proliferation of surveillance technologies in our daily lives is both alarming, pervasive, and sadly accepted. These technologies are not only prevalent in our streets and workplaces, but have also seeped into our educational institutions, raising critical questions about privacy, autonomy, and the very nature of schooling. Surveillance systems in schools claim to enhance safety by identifying potential threats from school shooters to students exhibiting signs of suicidal ideation. However, the validity and ethical implications of these claims are hotly debated. Are these technologies truly protecting students, or are they contributing to a culture of mistrust and control, much like the predictive policing tactics used by law enforcement? Today, we're joined by Allison Butler, co-author of the insightful book, Surveillance Education, Navigating the Conspicuous Absence of Privacy in Schools. Her work delves into the complex and often troubling landscape of surveillance in educational settings, exploring how these practices affect not just safety, but the very essence of learning and human development. As Higdon and Butler point out, in a society increasingly defined by surveillance, schools have become testing grounds for technologies that monitor, predict, and control behavior, often at the expense of students' rights and well-being. We will explore the implications of this surveillance, asking whether it is a necessary precaution or a net negative that deepens the sense of alienation and distrust in an already fragmented society. Please welcome our guest, Allison Butler. She is a senior lecturer and director of the Media Literacy Certificate Program in the Department of Communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. It's long. Damn title. She is also co-director of the Mass Media Literacy, I can't even talk, literacy nonprofit organization, where she develops and runs training programs for teachers covering critical media literacy in K through 12 schools. Vice president on the board of the Media Freedom Foundation and a spokesperson for Project Censored. Almost said Protect Censored. Oops. Her research focuses on critical media literacy and critiques of surveillance technologies in education. Please welcome Allison Butler.
Thanks so much for having me.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm okay. Was that an adequate introduction?
I feel really, that was incredible. It's the end of the day here in the East Coast. This is like really the highlight so far.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, let's give you some lowlights. Really F that good feeling up. You do a lot with media literacy, which I find a very important thing. One of the big projects I've been working on for the last couple of years that's finally about to see the light of day is like a video essay series a la Adam Curtis that I put together called kayfabe, which is the term used in vaudeville and wrestling, where you kind of don't let the audience in on the fact that the whole thing is rigged. And I feel that that's the way media works in the modern era. There's a lot of political kayfabe that goes on, and especially the way that stories are presented to people. So the fact that you work in media literacy means you're already a hero in my book.
Thank you.
You're doing the heavy lifting, as they say. So let's get to these questions and talking points that we have for you. In surveillance education, you discuss how schools have become testing grounds for surveillance technologies. Could you elaborate on the types of surveillance systems currently being employed in schools and their intended purposes? From the book, you say schools, once bastions of learning and intellectual freedom, are increasingly becoming spaces of control and monitoring, where every move is tracked and every action is scrutinized. That's, again, I think we said this a little bit off air when we were doing our introduction to one another. We're both of around the same age, grew up in the same time. Is this a whole different world than the world we existed in going to school in the 80s and 90s?
For sure it is. I think if you want to think about when you and I were in school, the real big technological breakthrough that we probably had in our, say, middle school to high school was our classrooms getting computers, right? This was a real thing. Late 80s, early 90s. It was a platform of Bill Clinton's first presidential run, was that he was going to get computers in every classroom. And it worked, right? We got computers in classrooms, but the problem was that no one quite knew what to do with them, right? Teachers hadn't been trained in how to use computers. It wasn't a thing that most of us didn't have at home. And so we had this technology, didn't really have anything to do with it, right? This was the time before the regular people had the internet. And maybe we use them for writing papers. But one thing that has remained true from our archaic schooling to today is that, first and foremost, what a computer in the classroom provides for students and for teachers is a brand, right? You're not going to get an unbranded computer. So you and I were at school looking at a brand of computer, which meant maybe our teachers didn't quite know what to do with them. Maybe we didn't quite know what to do with them. But for a couple hours every day, for several hours every day, we got to see a brand. What we've seen now in the 21st century, and what we see with surveillance technologies, is that's almost this kind of romantic, innocent past. We absolutely have students engaging with brands, but they're engaging with them in a different way. If we're looking at K through 12 education, we're looking at quote unquote free equipment, free hardware and free software for students. You get a free laptop or a free tablet, a free Chromebook. You get free access to softwares that might otherwise have a charge. This is presented to our K through 12 teachers, to our families, to administrators as being a total win, an absolute benefit. The benevolence of a corporation giving this equipment. We absolutely saw this grow exponentially during the COVID lockdowns, school lockdowns. There's not much that's actually free about these technologies, because what's happening is that young people in their classrooms are tracked, they are surveilled. The pieces of hardware and bits of software are presented as free of a certain kind of financial cost, but young people are paying for it with their identities. We see this with teachers as well. Teachers are presented with software that maybe they are mandated to use or strongly encouraged, and what they're often doing with that software is monitoring their students. And certainly some of the teachers that we spoke with for the book genuinely believed that they were the only ones monitoring, that when they were watching their students, that was it. They didn't recognize that, like, the corporation that provided that software was monitoring students. When we're looking at higher ed, and we're looking, for the most part, at people in classrooms who aren't minors, we're looking at learning management systems, we're looking at online resources, we're looking at note-taking technologies. All of these are presented as convenient. All of these are presented as ways of making lives of instructors better, because they can grade more quickly, they can catch plagiarism, they can find, they can sort of track their students for making sure that they're okay. But when we take a little bit of a step away from this, what's really happening is these are private for-profit companies who are richly profiting off of young people's data. We're super concerned with both K-12 and higher education. We sometimes make a distinction between the two.
I noticed that.
For the most part, folks in K-12 are minors. And so this is the way that these corporations have access to data that they might otherwise be restricted from.
So that's interesting. When you talk about the branding aspect of the way we had computers, I can't even remember the brand of computer. I think the world before Apple really blows up in the late 90s, 2000s. It's a different technological world. There is no real monopoly on things like cell phones, because not everybody has them. And computers, there's a lot of people with PCs. I didn't know anyone with a Macintosh. Maybe you did. Maybe you had rich friends. I don't know what side of the tracks you're from. You don't seem like you had Molly Ringwald's Pretty in Pink life. You didn't make your prom dress?
I didn't make my prom dress, no.
Did you had her Breakfast Club life?
Oh no. Oh my goodness. Sushi in high school in detention? Absolutely not.
No. Even when you look at a movie like that, which always seemed strange to me, because first of all, that was a massive library.
Massive, you're right. Beautiful.
Right? This is massive. I think they filmed it in a college. They had to. If that was a public school in Chicago, then we need to have more geniuses coming out of Chicago.
That's a fair point.
But there really isn't surveillance. That's why the kids can sneak out. There's no cameras in the school. There's no metal detectors in the school, right? I mean, look, there's so many reasons why. I recently rewatched that movie. I shouldn't say recent, like a year ago, on a date, and I was like, "Oh man, these kids suck."
Oh yeah, you watch Breakfast Club as an adult, and you suddenly have a weird sympathy for the janitor and the principal.
You really do.
It's really distressing.
You really do. But that school, I'm sure schools like that still exist, unless you're going to tell me a horror story that they don't, where you don't need cameras and metal detectors and all this tracking software. Or do we just live in a world right now where that's just the norm across the board, whether you go to a nice school with a massive 8-story library, or you go to an inner city school where you got 4 books, from 1975?
I think that our schools today are surveillance factories, if you will, like to your point of cameras in the hallways, of metal detectors when students are walking in. Sure, we're absolutely going to see a difference between um, maybe between urban areas and suburban areas or rural areas, but like maybe not that much, right? And to your point about like wealthier schools versus schools that are more struggling, in fact, one of the things that we found was that a lot of wealthier parents or wealthier school districts are actually looking for more surveillance. You know, in the headlines recently, excuse me, as we're kind of going back to school, we're seeing a lot of the conversations now about whether schools should ban cell phones in schools or in
I've
classrooms. Should there be
seen
a
that.
place? Mhm.
I've
I mean,
seen that.
it's not surprising that it's happening right at
I
the end of August, beginning of September. Our brains are on back to school,
Mhm.
and what we're seeing and what we saw from our research was that it's often parents that want their children to have phones and want access to their children during the school day, in part for what they perceive to be a way of kind of keeping their children safer. What the research plays out is that there isn't actually evidence that that our children are safer by having a phone in school. Right. I mean, it's a terrible thing that we have to be having this conversation, right? Again, to you and I and to our age group, we had fire drills, right? And we probably thought they were mostly ridiculous because the way in which you leave a building for a fire drill, we've learned how to be super passive in our exiting of a building during fire drill, right? We've got big signs, we've got staircases. Every one of us in our schools had like the place you went to with
Mhm.
your classroom.
Mhm.
What our young children are dealing with today is active
Just
shooter drills
yeah.
where there is no passive departure, right? There's no passive departure from an active shooter drill. And what we think of as beautiful classrooms or beautiful schools usually make it more dangerous for active shooters because of glass, like lovely windows where
Yeah.
we have natural light. That's pretty
Well, I'm
dangerous.
from Richmond, California, and I don't know if you guys studied that area of California, but, the high schools I think there's a couple new ones now, but the high schools in the district have no windows.
Sure, exactly.
They were
And
designed
that's
like that in the
they're designed
'70s,
like
yeah.
that. Absolutely. Um, and you know, our young children today also went to school during COVID.
Mm,
And so when parents sent them back to, you know, depending
mhm,
on where you lived in the United States and whether or not there were lockdowns, if and when parents were sending kids back to school, there was a whole new set of concerns. So, like, we don't want to disrespect parents' fears or parents' concerns. What we actually think is that they're being manipulated. This is, I think, a very cruel thing that these corporations do, which is, you know, capitalize on parents' fears about keeping their children safe and selling them this idea that having a camera in a classroom or a metal detector or a technology that monitors their behavior, that monitors what they're doing on their screens, or that having their cell phone in a classroom is going to keep them safer. And as I said, there's not evidence for this. You kind of can't prove a negative, right? I mean, it's like, well, we didn't have a bad thing happen, so therefore the cell phone is the reason why, or the surveillance technology is the reason why. There's no way to
I
really
would point to Parkland and Uvalde as
exactly. I
perfect
mean, we
examples
yep.
of A, you had the training, B, you had an armed guard in Parkland, C, in Uvalde, I think the cops were called and they didn't go, right?
Yeah, and everything was caught on camera and nothing was prevented.
Yeah. So the reality is, it's much like a 9-year-old with a black belt. You can go and pay at a McDojo or
Hmm.
belt factory is what they call them. And you can get a black belt at 9, 10, 11 years old and think you are a badass.
Hmm.
But if you actually get into a fight with someone that's not afraid of contact and probably knows what they're doing, they're going to F you up.
Yep.
You're going to forget all of your horse stance and everything else. And you're gonna feel like the worst person ever. And that you're probably gonna get a gun. You're probably gonna get a weapon of some kind because you found out that you were not the lethal weapon, but just a clown whose parent paid a lot of money for a black belt, and you have all these trophies for an ass whooping.
Yep.
And that's the way I kind of feel from the standpoint of we have to be able to prevent school shootings because it becomes thought crime at a certain point.
Mhm.
And you kind of talk about that. I mean, there's a movie that came out in the 2000s called Minority Report, with the precogs where they're supposed to, find out the crime before it happens. And that really is the way I think most people view law enforcement, even people in these left spaces. The first thing I always hear people say is, cops don't stop crime. It's like, well, that was really not their job.
Mhm.
A crime is going to happen. Like, you can't, like, you really want someone to, I think you're going to be a bad person and rob someone.
Right.
Like that. And to have this kind of explanation for the reason why you're going through young people's emails, because the reality of being a parent is you just don't care about your child's privacy. You don't pay any bills in this house. I love you to death. I might take a bullet for you. I might even take a criminal charge for you. I might. But I'm going to go through your stuff whenever I feel like it. I am the Stasi. Just accept it, right? So when the school says, "Hey, we're going to go through your kid's locker, we're going to have cameras," as a parent, like that, I feel comfortable,
Mhm.
and that's kind of a sad reality of how conservative we are as parents, regardless of how cool we think we are. I know I'm not a cool parent. Look
Well,
at me.
I think there's also like a class-based argument here too, because when we look at things like cell phones or certain types of software that are on students' computers that parents also want access to, we are often looking at a relationship that is really grounded in I access, right? Like I as the parent, I as the teacher, I'm the one that has access to this. When we look at underserved, underrepresented children growing up in poverty, it is social workers, it is the
Mhm.
system, it is the state that has access to it. And excuse me, we have children tracked from toddlerhood. One of the women that we interviewed in our book, she works in early childhood education um, in a school that gets federal funding. And she has to monitor and note the behavior of her students every day. They're 2 years old. Talk to me about what 2-year-old physically behaves, not like not like the test. I mean, children are physical in their bodies, right?
Yes.
But these are children whose parents are probably already in the system, already in some sort of social services or child welfare, whose parents might be receiving unemployment or some sort of state or federal benefits. So they're already tracked. Maybe they live in public housing, so they're already tracked. So now we're just starting it earlier with our toddlers by tracking their behavior as a form of prediction, right? We
Mhm.
predict that these young people in particular are going to be bad. I mean, I don't know. I don't really remember a Minority Report being a good or bad movie. I don't. I saw it, but I don't remember it, the quality of it.
Yeah.
But it's exactly that we think you are going to be bad, and
Yeah.
so therefore we're going to track you. I think when we watched Minority Report, like in the movie theater, like when it first came out, it was probably presented as like, ooh, how futuristic, like how
Yeah.
sci-fi and like technologically fascinating. But when we start to break it down, it's we are predetermining who is going to be a criminal. There's a great show on TV. It's called Abbott Elementary. It's
It's not that great.
oh,
It's just the black office. Just stop. Just
but I do think it brings up some, some topics in education
Mhm.
uh, that largely go like untalked about, like in pop culture when we're looking at children's education. And one episode, all the teachers get a tablet that's going to help them teach their students how to read. And it's like, to your point of it being The Office, there's all sorts of sitcom stuff
Mhm.
prevails, pratfalls ensue. But at the very end, the principal comes in and, sorry, spoiler alert, the principal comes in and pulls them all back, because apparently the reason why this school got this technology for free was because the Pennsylvania state um, prison institution was predicting how many beds they would need. And
So
that's
now I know who wrote that part in the book. But seriously, that when I watched very little of that show, and I'm just giving you a hard time, but you have to be real that everything is The Office post The Office, TV wise.
No,
But
that's a good. I'm gonna think about that. That's a really. I like
that's your
that.
next that's your next book on pop
No,
culture.
no, that's my next time on the couch.
You're sitting there stoned, being like, "Oh, that guy's right." but when I read that in the book, I thought to myself, that's really interesting that people made a joke out of something like that. Considering I went to one of those schools and lived in one of those areas in Richmond, California, and I think again we're very dismissive of these kind of school to prison pipelines because we see things like independent study,
Mm,
just that name. Like if you called it what it really was, I don't know if parents would be so willing to have their kids in it. Because it really is setting you up. Like here's a packet of shit. Put your name on it, turn it in this day, and we might give you some Craigslist job listings around graduation time, right? Um, that's kind of a I've been encountering more kids in that system, and it does make me a little uncomfortable whenever I encounter kids in that system because my first question is like, well, why? And it's like, well, I don't like school. It's like there's a lot of things, there's tons of shit I don't like. I don't like work, and I allegedly do what I love, and it's stressful. And sometimes I don't like it. Sometimes I don't like the people that I work with. Sometimes I don't like the fucking people that watch the show. There's a lot of shit I don't like. It's not fucking perfect. Nothing's perfect. Now I sound like an old man. I don't give a shit. I am an old man. Deal with it. Fucking deal with it. But seriously, um, the acceptance of this, and it's like, look, you're going to somewhere where you are going to be surveilled and you are
mhm,
being tracked in a negative way.
mhm.
And whatever you and your parents have been led to think that this is, it is not that. How do you talk to people in that situation, or can you talk to people in that situation?
I mean, so the way in which Nolan and I approached this book was we really wanted a couple things to happen. We really wanted to keep a human element into this. We wanted to make sure that folks knew that we weren't trying to punish anybody for their technology use. And we aren't anti-technologists. We just think everybody deserves to know what is happening with their technology. We also tried our best. This is really tricky given how much these technologies change, but
Yeah.
tried our best to avoid sort of, for lack of a better term, like trendy. We really wanted to kind of talk about some like bigger picture. We do absolutely throw out a lot of brands and a lot of um, corporations, mostly critical of them,
Mhm.
but also trying to say like it isn't just about these specific things, it's this bigger picture, right? And so yeah, for quite some time I would say neither of us were terribly fun at parties, because when everybody does the polite thing at a party and it's like, oh, what are you doing, and you're
Yeah.
like, you don't really want to ask that, and then we would tell people,
Mhm.
he's in California, I'm in Massachusetts, we're doing this like across the nation, and people would get really sad, and we got sad too. Like, we're both pretty quick draft writers. We spend a lot of time revising and editing, but we're pretty quick about getting stuff out of our heads.
I'm
And
jealous.
we both kind of confessed at one point that we were really struggling with that. And we sort of realized collectively that part of what we were struggling with was just how hard it was to realize and to put to paper how pervasive all of this is. As a culture, we are trained in sort of soft surveillance, right? The surveillance of convenience. I am
Mm.
never surprised when there's a camera at the ATM, right? I used to live in New York City, and you were never surprised at buildings that had, especially post 9/11, that had
Mhm.
cameras. There was always the Law and Order episode where they would go into the
Yeah.
bodega and they were going to be able to solve the crime, but
Mhm.
the camera was broken, right? And then they actually had to like do something else, right? When we go for the convenience of um, say a restaurant and we look up the menu on a QR code, or anything that we can get on a QR code. There's so many ways that soft surveillance has entered into our lives. Our GPS to help us get places in our car, the Find My app so that I know where my friends are, or I can ostensibly figure out that somebody is safely home.
Wait, so there's a timeout. There's an app where you can find your friends? Is
It,
isn't that called the phone?
No, Find My. Oh my gosh, no, Find My is it again, it got presented to us as like if you lose your phone, as long as your Find My is on, you can
Oh,
find
okay.
it.
Mhm.
But my students use it to make sure they know, and they use it for two very different reasons. One of them I find annoying. One of them I find pretty sad. The annoying one is like if their friends don't text them back right away,
Yeah.
and they see on their Find My that their friends are in my class where I ban electronics,
Uh-huh.
they know why they're not going to text them back for 75 minutes. So they can kind of track each other through campus, make sure, the other main reason why they use it, which is just such a mark on the society that we live in, is when they're going out and to make sure somebody got home safely and to sort of
Oh,
track
okay.
them, to make sure that if a friend left with somebody else or if a friend left to walk home alone, they can kind of track them, which
That's
is
cool.
just, it is, but it's also sad that that's the world that we live in.
Is that also part of that built-in fear, though?
I think it's very much part of the built-in fear. We've learned how to be afraid, right? My students were not alive during 9/11, but they have grown up with the ripple effects of 9/11, which is a lot more surveillance, right? My students have grown up with their cell phones, their smartphones. They never didn't have a smartphone unless their parents were like really old fashioned. So they've grown up with that access at their fingertips. They've been surveilled since day one. It takes a lot of work to try and kind of introduce some of this stuff to folks as, this is the world that you live in. And when we talk with students, when Nolan and I are talking to our classes, we're really not saying to them, and by the way, the most success you're going to get out of this class is to then turn everything off. Like, that's not our motivation at all. What
Mhm.
we really want, as I said before, is for anybody, our students, our teachers, our families, our administrators, to know exactly what is happening with their technologies, why their social media feeds are filled with a specific topic that they kind of can't seem to get away from. Why it's so easy to move through things, why they don't really have to look very hard for stuff that they like because of all the data that they are sharing that says sort of who they are or who they kind of
And why they can't
want
get
to
out of
be.
it, right? They can't get out of that loop of
It's
the
hard.
stuff you like.
It's
It's
hard to get out of
yeah.
it.
It's living in a world with commercials and, uh, let's just say curated television, right?
Sure.
Pre-programmed television where you had to wait for something to happen. If you were watching a series that had climactic endings, you actually had to wait till the following week. Um, it became all of the talk in school about what you saw. Oh my God, can you believe Dylan and Brenda broke up?
Oh,
Kelly's such a bitch.
that was hard times. Those were hard times.
I
The
watched
late 90s,
90210. I don't give a damn what you people say.
the late 90s were difficult.
It was a different time, but um it is interesting that people are so attached to these things. It's like a drug, and I'm
Hmm.
trying to detox myself
Hmm.
from scrolling. And I was reading your book, and I live in Mexico. It takes me too long to get hard copies of stuff. So I just asked for the PDF. My iPad that is Appless has broken, so I have to use my phone. And I took all the scrolling apps off my phone, and I found myself scrolling like my email. It's a drug, and we're addicting young people as soon as they can sit up their heads, and you give them an iPad. And we used to say, look how smart that kid is. They just work that iPad. That's what grandparents say. They can just work that iPad. And it's like, yeah, but they're not that smart. These aren't the kids that are programming VCRs. These aren't the kids that are writing code that had to, write the code for their HTML MySpace profile. These are kids, if you don't put it in front of them, they just don't see it. If it's not app based, don't understand.
It's hard to get past that.
Like, very accepting as well of the surveillance technology. So you talk about in the book, when you tell young people, let's just high school age, let's say junior, seniors of high school, right? You're in that awesome in between age. If you're not quite an adult, but you have to start making adult decisions, is what society says. And you start telling these people you're being surveilled. Do they just shrug their shoulders at you and go, whatever?
Sometimes, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes even after we've kind of convinced them of everything, they still do. And that's okay. Because again, what they now know is what all of it's about. So we'll often talk about privacy. And sometimes what we'll also do is talk about labor. So when you're talking to 16, 17-year-olds who are minors, when we start talking with them about like what it means to be sharing all of this data with a nameless, faceless corporation that is then using it, sometimes we'll ask, like, do any of you get paid? Right? I mean, this is labor. Our social media would be empty if it weren't for the users, particularly young users, right? I mean, I guess Facebook, grandma's totally fine with Facebook, but the cool social media, but they're not paid like this. They're spending so much time, they're putting in so much information. It is a form of labor. There is no acknowledgement of their work. So once we start to kind of talk about it a little bit like that, things start to shift a little bit. I do, granted, my students are over 18, but I do a project with my class where we actually go through and read the privacy policies and the terms of service for their top. I ask them, what are your top social media sites? And then the next class I'll bring in the privacy policies or the terms of service, and I have them read them like line by line, and it's it freaks them out a little bit, when you look at some of them where even in death, users cannot sue, that once a pic is up there, that corporation owns your face, that if you are not allowed to use this technology under a certain age, but if you are using it, it's not their responsibility, right? That company doesn't need to figure out that you maybe like lied to them. So once we can kind of start to dig into that, it's not that they're going to get rid of this, right? I mean, this is for the most part their social life. And my goodness, how on earth could I potentially teach my class without some use of these technologies? It just wouldn't work. We have 25,000 undergraduates at my institution. Like, how are we getting that grading done, right? So we recognize how necessary, to some extent, these technologies are. It's all the other stuff that we're usually kept in the dark or kept secret about. So what we try and do with anybody, young people in particular, certainly, but everybody, is to kind of talk about how we're being a little bit bamboozled and what might it mean to be less in the dark about this. This is the way our technologies are. It's not necessarily the way that they ought to be or the way that they could be. So we try and kind of present it as like, again, we're not here to tell you to turn your technology off. We're here to say, how about we learn more about what is happening with our technologies?
Do your kids ever feel like, and I'm starting to feel like this because I exist in this world of online media, right? And a lot of my friends that have shows like this, everyone's just so locked in to social media, like following Twitter things and starting and engaging in arguments. And young people are the same way, right? Engaging in gossip and drama, arguments and conversations. Do you ever point out to them that sometimes that device is a bit of an anchor? Or is that hard to get across?
Well, certainly not at the beginning of the semester. One thing I do at the beginning of one of my classes at the beginning of the semester is, and I should figure out a way to do this in my other class too. Topic is different, so I'd have to change it a bit. But is I have them write, like usually the first, second day of class, I have them write a pro con list of their media, and I let them define what they want that to be. Um, and then I hold on to it for the whole semester. And then we go through our thing and we do all of our stuff. And they absolutely read about surveillance technologies in a few different ways. And then I give them back their pro con list at the end of the year. And I don't really do much with it, to be honest. I just kind of let them ruminate on it a little bit, let them think about it, and sort of what it means to see some of their technologies in a new or different light. I ban electronics in my classroom. You can't have your cell phone or your computer unless there's a documented need for it. And inevitably, I get a lot of pushback at the beginning of the semester, but at the end of the semester, I get a lot of comments about how, well, this was the only class I really wasn't distracted in, like it was weird.
Yeah.
So I try and sort of model some of the ways, because if you stand up there and tell people, like, here's all the things that are bad for you, who cares, right? Like, who cares? Like, nobody's going to check in with that. Everybody's checking out from that. So instead we sort of try and model, like, what might be another way of looking at this, or how might we take a break from our technologies, from our devices, in a way to sort of see them differently. So I always talk about, like, taking kind of like a critical approach or a critical distance, asking, engaging in a process of critical inquiry, that it's not about dislike. It's about taking a little bit of a step away so that we can see it and understand it a little bit differently. So do they want to hear it? Probably not. And are they maybe getting something out of it that can help with their own way of processing information? I sure hope so.
I mean, look, being without your phone in 2024 is like kind of being without your genitalia. Like, dude, where did my genitalia go? I had it here earlier.
Yeah.
You could go without your keys, but if you lose your phone, it's like, look, dude, I lost my phone. Everybody stop doing what you're doing. My phone's gone. So I could imagine you telling 18 and 19-year-olds, okay, guys, no phones. They're like, I need my phone. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My parents need to reach me. No, they don't. No one loves you. No one's trying to kidnap you.
I can't say that to my students, but yeah.
I tell it to people all the time. I have guns because I protect my family. Nah, nobody wants your kids. I've seen them. They're fine. But proponents of surveillance argue that these technologies can prevent tragedies such as school shootings and suicides. However, what evidence exists to support or refute these claims? Is there a risk that these systems create a false sense of security? From the book, the promise of safety through surveillance is often overstated, with little evidence to suggest these technologies can reliably predict or prevent violent incidents.
Yeah, we don't have the evidence for it, right? But fear is a really huge motivator, right? Almost every time there's a new technology introduced, there's a simultaneous fear and fascination with it. And if we went through sort of communication technology or media history, we would see this, all of it, right? In the 1950s, there was terrible fears about boys, in particular, boys reading comic books, that it was going to make them behave violently, right? We were terribly concerned in the 1800s with the development of the motion pictures, because it was going to provide way too much salacious information. And you look back at those early movies and you're like, that's a train, like, entering a station. What is so salacious about this, right? The well-turned ankle of a young woman, like, that was going to be the moral downfall of our society. We were just going straight to some sort of, sex and danger and horrible choices and a complete lack of morality. So every time we have a new technology, there's sort of this simultaneous fear and fascination. What I think is happening with our surveillance technologies is that these corporations are playing up on our fears, right? And so if we get this kind of advertising language, a sort of marketing or PR language about how we're going to prevent a dangerous thing. It's a particularly cruel way, I think, of tapping into fear, that says, like, I'm going to acknowledge it, I'm going to make it bigger than it might actually be, and then I'm going to provide you with a solution to a problem that you didn't know you had. And all of us can be kind of correct about predicting the future, because if it didn't happen that way, we just kind of change our prediction and be like, well, what I really meant was, so tapping into that fear. And look, I don't think I'm so delusional as to say that we have nothing to fear in our world. I think we are living in dark times. I think we've probably been living in dark times for a lot longer than maybe some of us want to admit. But we live in a really difficult time, and wherever one believes we are with the COVID pandemic, and when we're looking at multiple places around our globe that are engaging in horrific warfare, like, there is actually quite a lot to be scared of. What I have a problem with is folks who capitalize at a tidy profit off of that fear. Sometimes the way to counter fears is through good old fashioned human communication. And again, I'll say it again, I'm not one to say that we need to throw all of our technologies away. I'm not like a sort of technology smashing Luddite here. It's more that there's so much that we've kind of been kept in the dark about, and that feels really unfair and disrespectful to ourselves. So what we're trying to do is kind of turn some of that fear and that darkness around, because often that's presented as sort of the end of the conversation, right? Here's something that will solve your fears. Like, you have been told to be afraid of this, we have got this magical solution for it. For us, it's kind of like, okay, let's use that as a starting point. Why are we afraid of this? What is it? What might else we be able to do? So one of the things that we do with the book, which is dark and depressing throughout much of it, is we actually try and end on a sort of solutions oriented note, which is suggestions for regular people, for families, for administrators, for librarians, for classroom teachers, K-12 and higher ed, to bring in some lessons and activities into their classrooms or into their schools as a way that good old-fashioned regular people can push back, right? Maybe ways that we can sort of start to see our technology slightly differently, make use of them slightly differently, maybe engage in a little bit more self-protection, have a little bit more autonomy and self-control.
It is a dark book. When your publicist hit me up about it, it's so funny. She's like, "Hey, I think it'd be a great book. I think you'll love it." And I was like, "Yeah. This topic sounds really depressing. Please send it over. I'll take a look at it." And I reluctantly took my time to try to engage with it, because I saw it was an academic book. I was like, "Oh, that means there's gonna be a lot of big words." It wasn't. It wasn't.
No, we write
You
this.
wrote it. Yeah.
Our intention was to write it to families and teachers, librarians. Yeah.
It's an anti-academic book. So
Yeah.
props to you guys for that. It is easy to digest. It's not a door stopper. It's
Thanks.
like 180 pages, so I appreciated that.
I think it's pretty efficient.
No, you guys did a great job. You strategically hit all the beats to actually try to reach real people and not just make sure you keep tenure. A lot of professors on this show. We're coming up on the hour. I know it's late where you are, but I did want to at least ask this question, because you do talk about it in the book. How has neoliberalism affected public education? Has the charter school become the preferred model in this new era to see the market as solutions to much larger systemic issues? Quote, neoliberal rationality contests that markets are best suited to create and assess value in a society because they rely on efficiency and accountability. The neoliberal approach to governance seeks to create order, stability, and economic growth through a business-friendly environment, low taxes and deregulation, technological innovation, quantitative data analysis, laissez-faire global capitalism, meritocracies, and reliance on experts as its guiding principles. I did a video essay about a year ago that'll be airing again on Meets TV, called personal Jesus philanthrocapitalism, and I kind of focus on Bill Gates because for me, when I read that part of the book, there was no better person that this describes and how they've negatively affected public education and public health than a person like Bill Gates, where you have so much money, you literally change the way research is done and you change the way we look at experts. So I agree with you. We live in a society where experts tell us what's good or bad for us, and experts with a partisan bend. And not everybody's looking to see who's funding the research. Not everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So when the Common Core stuff was coming out, parents hated it. But the experts told us, well, this is what your kids need so we can compete in the global market. And it's like, we can't compete in the global market because there's these things called H-1B visas. And there's smart people in India. And if a corporation wants to cut costs, they're sure as fuck not going to hire my kid. They can hire somebody that's smarter and won't ask for benefits. So that's not true, but no one really said that during this time. And everybody wanted to buy in because we all thought we were going to have super soldier children if they learned that the longest way to figure out what 2 times 2 is going to make you a more efficient student. You were teaching in this era. Can you preach about this, please?
So to your question about neoliberalism, yeah, I mean, that is it's probably where we've already been. I don't necessarily know that it's on the horizon. I think it's pretty much the oxygen that we're breathing. It is the hyper competition and the hyper individuality, right? And our social media, which are very much tools of surveillance, you have the word social in them, but like, you can call yourself whatever you want. They're in fact profoundly antisocial. They leave us more isolated and alone. They capitalize on this neoliberal ethos of the market will solve all and this kind of hyper individual competition. And that has become part of our schooling, I think, is really dangerous. But I don't think it's, like I said, it's not like on the horizon. It's where we've been, right? It's Milton Friedman in 1955. He was an economist who really had a kind of a side hustle interest in education, and he's the one who sort of whispered into Nixon's ear about school vouchers. I mean, this was before we really had anything called a charter school, but in the face of desegregation, when nice white parents were very concerned about sending their nice white children to school with children who might not have been nice and certainly weren't white, suddenly vouchers, private schools, an increased quantity of religious schools. Like, this was a way that you could kind of resegregate but still be following the law, right? And so neoliberalism has absolutely been part of our education system, long before these surveillance technologies came out. If charter schools are often dishonest, right? I have a lot of problems with charter schools, not least of which is because I think they're dishonest, right? They poach students from neighborhood schools. They have no labor protections for teachers. They siphon money out of the public school system. They pull young people out of their communities, and then when they feel like they're done, they pack up and leave, and then they leave kind of a shell for the community. I don't mean to punish charter school students or charter school teachers. When we're looking at young, energetic folks right out of college or right out of ed schools, like, who are passionate about teachers, this is a job that they can get. This is a job that wants to hire them right away. If you're 22, 24 and a school is really interested in you, that's going to feel great. They haven't necessarily been trained in what a charter school's politics are, right? So we've got these extremely dedicated teachers who are working 6 or 7 days a week, who are working 12 or 13-hour days, who are then getting burnt out really, really quickly because there are no labor protections. So charter schools are really doing a kind of fabulous job of further bifurcating us, right? I mean, they go hand in hand with the surveillance technologies of kind of compartmentalizing us and kind of keeping us all in our little boxes. And I think sometimes there are themes in charter schools that are probably really valuable for young people, can really help organize their learning in a particular way, or open up the doors to stuff that they're like really, really interested in. But to your point, we have to really look behind the scenes, right? I mean, I think you're absolutely right about Bill Gates. I think we also need to kind of look in stranger places that we might not think about, right?
Mhm.
This is the kind of time where I tell, where I kind of confess that, like, I am not a purist, right? I mean, I have a Netflix account, and yet I really believe in the public school system and the connection between the two of those, the idea of the public school system. The
Mhm.
connection between the two of those is Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, who doesn't probably make much money off of my individual account, but whatever, he's making a ton of money. He puts a lot of his money into down ballot California politics, down ballot California politicians, to support those running for office who will do everything they can to eradicate the teachers union, the public school teachers union. Because look, as problematic as a public school teachers union might be, it is labor protection for teachers, and it is one of the strongest unions that we have in the country. And if you undo the teachers unions, the domino effect could be that you undo other unions, which makes it a lot easier for somebody like Reed Hastings, owner of a private corporation, to not have to worry about labor rights at his corporation. And as he is branching out into big, global uh, movie making and television making. So, yeah, we can undo a teachers union to be able to undo the other stuff that sort of seems to be getting in his way. The individual teacher in a charter school, the individual student in a charter school, they don't necessarily have that information. Why would they? But it creates all these sort of like moving parts. Kind of butchering and mixing up my metaphors here, but
That's fine.
all these cogs and gears and puzzle pieces that are all sort of happening behind the scenes, and it is so much easier for them to happen because of the data that is mined of young people through all of these surveillance technologies.
Can I bring you back on here to talk about charter schools one day?
Absolutely. I could talk about charter schools for a long time. And again, I cannot emphasize enough, I don't want to punish individual schools or students or teachers. It's the system of charter schooling that I think is really so dangerous and detrimental.
Because there are schools. Look, I was born in Oakland. As you can tell by the way I talk, I'm a Bay Area native. I'm a Californian. Much like your co-writer
Hmm.
who wasn't here, but you have more credentials. So that's all that matters. We got the good one. That being said, Oakland has my young son goes to a charter school. That's pretty awesome. Not gonna lie. That being said, I'm not a fan of charters. It was a point of contention between his mother and I. He goes to it anyway, but my fear with these schools is sometimes they're pretty cool,
Hmm.
and then they don't make money,
Hmm.
and then they shut down.
Hmm.
It's a totally different model, and I hate to say business model, because when we think of public school, there's no business model in public school. It's not there to be a moneymaker. But what happens to a society that only understands the public good, parks, schooling, healthcare, shelter? We can only understand the public good through neoliberal terms.
Yeah.
We often talk about the end of history moment, and I think, well, let's add that there's a neoliberal realism in which we live in, right? You deal with young people. How often do they speak in generational terms? That's just marketing terms.
Hmm.
We're coming back to an era of everything having to be like racialized. That's a lot of that has to do with marketing, right? Culture is something that has to be siloed off. That's marketing. That's neoliberalism. So what happens when that's the only way we see the world? And now that's the only way we see education. And if everything is about markets and buying and selling, be it our labor, our intellectual labor, uh, our fun, right? Right? Hey, you can market my fun. Take it, Instagram. We're going to throw everything up to the market because we just don't care. But how does that then? How do you then write a book in this era? Because everybody will say tisk tisk, but who's really going to fight to try to stop these things from happening, or at least seriously regulate it? Because of that neoliberal realism in which we live in, where I can change the iconography of my clothes and say, look, I'm a leftist. I got a hammer and sickle on my shirt. Look at my social media profile. I have a Marx quote. I'm the real deal. Right? It's just like punk rock was back in the day. Look at my mohawk. Look how transgressive these spikes are on this jacket. What happens when that's the only way we have to kind of fight back is just rhetorically, and we're really not trying to organize to stop these things? Because that's my fear. That is my pessimistic fear as I'm reading your book. I'm enjoying what I'm reading in a dark way, right? It's information. But it scares me because it exists in a realm where there's a lot of acceptance of this neoliberal realism.
I mean, I think we start by explaining to, regular people kind of what neoliberalism is about. And I think once students start to see that, they start to see it in all sorts of places, right? I mean, this is one of the things I love about teaching college students is they come in so savvy and so sophisticated, and they are like, oh my gosh, I was never that cool when I was in college. Way to go. And then you teach them something like neoliberalism, or you teach them something like, I mean, so many of my students are from Massachusetts, and so we'll talk about like redlining in the Boston real estate area, and they go home and they look at their communities a little bit differently. And so I think how Nolan and I kind of take a look at things is we do our absolute best to not be cynical, because I feel like once you're cynical about something, it's kind of the end, right? We give up at cynicism, but instead what we're asking is for folks to be skeptical and to ask questions. And if we can just start even that teeny tiny little thing, do I think we need to do more than that? Absolutely. But we can't start sort of at the biggest thing. We have to start with this smaller stuff, make it somewhat manageable. If we can get our readers, our students, our families to start asking some questions about this, to start looking at something like education, or looking at something like free, whatever free might, whatever comes after free technology, free hardware, free software. One of Facebook's lines is like, always free and always will be. We can start to look at some of those teeny tiny little things. I mean, a 4-letter single syllable word, free, can open the doors to us learning so much other stuff. And then maybe that's how we can start to make some change, right? I mean, again, to use my students as an example, I have students that they graduate, they want to go work in advertising, marketing, and PR. They do it for a couple years. Some of them are wildly happy about it. Great, good for them. Others kind of come back after a few years and go, oh, I see what I'm doing now. What can I do differently? I got to get out of this, right? And it's like, you know what? It's not advertising, marketing, and PR that's evil or horrible, because the animal shelter needs advertising, marketing, and PR. Like the puppy that needs to be adopted somebody needs to find out about that puppy. So we can use those skills, we can use those kind of tactics for the forces of good, right? And so maybe that's a way that we can start to switch this stuff around, right? Surveillance is the way it's going to be. What if we could develop stuff so that our schools had proprietary software, so that, yes, the schools learned whatever they needed to learn about their students, but some giant corporation, some nameless, faceless police force doesn't learn about those schools? What if after a certain amount of time, all our data could get erased? So yes, I know I'm going to be tracked through this software through the end of the 12th grade, but as soon as I graduate, it's gone. it gets deleted, right? What if we had a right to be erased? What if there were opt-in or opt-out? Right now, every technology that we use, we almost inevitably have to do a 100% opt in, right? If you want to be on Instagram, if you want to be on TikTok, you have to agree to everything. There's no opportunity to say, no, I actually don't want it to be part of my experience. What if we made something more of an opt-in or opt-out, right? We can do this on our own. Every time we go to a new website, we can reject the cookies. It's a teeny tiny thing. It takes maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. It's one little pushback. It's my data's already out there. Like, that ship has sailed for me, right? Ship has sailed for so many of us. But maybe we start to push back a little bit and we say, hey, you know what? I don't want it all out there all the time. Maybe we take our phones and we turn off all notifications, so that if I want to go look at Instagram, or if I want to see if there's any emails or changes in the headlines, I'm going to be the one to choose that. I will choose my time. I will choose how I spend my time, not how my phone thinks I should spend my time, right? One of the things that my students say that they try and do is put on their phones like a timers. And I tell them, don't, again, do whatever you're going to do, but a timer is also sending data about what you're doing and when you're doing it, so that these corporations have a pretty good idea about when to send push notifications. How about you just don't use the timer? You just set yourself up in a way that makes it a little bit easier to have a little bit more space and to have a little bit more the opportunity for self-control. So we're, trying to figure out ways that we can all just even just a little bit, even just a tiny thing, can maybe help us make difference.
Thank you so much. Her name is Allison Butler. I did write it backwards originally.
That happens.
And oops. Her name is Allison Butler. Wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there is a link in the description to the book. Please check it out. At 180 pages. And a lot of that is footnotes, because it's an academic book, right? Footnotes. Write like the right wingers. Just make shit up, Allison.
Okay.
Thank you very much for spending the time to talk with me this evening. I think your book is a frightening reality that we all have to face. And I hope people pick it up.
Thank you so much.
This show is not the entire book. It's just a little teaser. Go get it. Don't be scared. Books can't hurt you. Thank you very much, Allison. Have a very good night.
Thank you.
Allison Butler. Surveillance in education. It's frightening. It's a frightening reality. I don't dig it. I'm starting to dig my phone less and less. I got caught up. I got today. You know how you get those text messages and or WhatsApp? So I live in Mexico, so I have WhatsApp to communicate with my friends in foreign countries, definitely people that I meet here. And I always get a WhatsApp message from an AI created Asian woman that's like, I'm at the gym. Where are you? It's like, bitch, I don't know you. Fucking texting me for. I really don't know you. And I live in Mexico. There's no fucking AI Asian women here. And AI Asian women aren't really hot to me. Sorry. I don't want to fuck a cartoon. How wacky is that? But so I laugh at those when I get those. And it's always like, hey, aren't we meeting for lunch? No, bitch. Not at all. I'm in my underwear right now with no intentions of meeting you. They got me today. It's been fucked up. I swear to God. I'm trying to get ready for the appearance I was making before this show, a movie night extravaganza. And I was so busy setting up the shows for next week because I'm leaving to see my kids. It's their birthdays. August is a busy month. My daughter turns 26. My son turns 6. Yes, they are 20 years apart. Yes, my pullout game is trash. Okay?
Because I nut quick.
It's a reality. It happens. So Starship Troopers. I haven't seen Starship Troopers in forever, so I'm like, I have to watch this movie. I just can't go in cold. That's rude. They asked me to be on. Be prepared. Get some notes. Get my notepad ready. My phone goes off. I get a text message from a number I don't recognize. It says, "Hi, Jason. How are you?" I should have known. No one says hi, Jason, to me. No one says hi, Jason, to me. There's stuff people say. I want to say it, but I can't say it because then it'll know, and then I'll get that message. I'll be like, "Oh, what's up?" And then it'll happen again. So I looked at it, and my first reaction was send it to junk. But it was a Los Angeles area code. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And I thought, because I'm single and I'm like this much of a piece of shit. And I thought, oh, maybe this is someone that I matched with like 2 years ago on some dating site that's newly single that was going through their, like, I made this whole scenario up in my head. This should let you know how ridiculously delusional I am. Oh, maybe it's some person that I matched with and something happened. Like they found someone cooler. But I was like on the list of the top 5 people they might fuck later. And they were going through their numbers. They're like, oh yeah, there's that dude, Jason. I should see what's up with him because maybe I'll bang that guy. That went like all before I did anything. This whole scenario played out in my head. This is how ridiculous I am. This is why I wish I had money so I can have like an assistant, like rich people that just has their phone and the text goes off. I go, oh, assistant X. Who was that? Don't worry about it. It was spam. Even if Toussaint was sitting watching the movie with me, if the text would have went off, she would have been like, who's that? And I would have been like, oh, it's this number I don't recognize. She would have went, oh, that's spam. And I'd be like, you know what? You're right. And the scenario wouldn't have happened. The make-believe, thirsty, 40-plus-year-old woman scenario wouldn't have happened. But what did I do? I looked at it and like a mildly intelligent adult, I thought to myself, this is probably spam. Because most people don't say hi, Jason. And if you're reconnecting on that mildly thirsty trip, you're probably going to be like, hey, 2 Ys. How are you? Right? 2 Ys lets you know what's up. Because the first Y is just maybe I'm down. The second Y means I'm down for whatever. No hey, just simple hi, Jason. Not the fake things. They're like, hey, Anna, we're going to have a dick suck contest and you were supposed to judge again. Not one of those fake messages. This was just simple. Hi, Jason, how are you? And I responded, who's this? No response. As soon as that happened, I said, fuck! Block the number. My phone finally stopped ringing. My phone was ringing nonstop. I'm not even trying to be funny. All these messages. Hey, I started getting emails. Hey, Jason, you were inquiring about web services? No, the fuck I wasn't. I didn't inquire about shit. You know how poor I am? I'm not inquiring about a goddamn thing. But I fucking responded. I responded. They put the bait. Just wait. Just wait. And it's like they knew. To Allison's point, they know what time you set your timer for. It was like right as I was setting a timer to remind me to turn the computer on and get ready. And got me. It's real, people. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying this is all real. I'm gonna get these messages. I'm gonna get these fucking phone calls. It sucks. They've gotten through my spam blockers. Just know if you get an email, hello, whatever your name is, how are you? You're not. Don't respond. Just block. Report and block and keep it moving. Don't have a cute little quip like, "Hey, fuck off." Don't be cute. Just don't respond because it's a trap. Admiral Akbar from Return of the Jedi needs to be in your head at that moment. That amphibious man in the final battle yelling out, "It's a trap." You have to hear that in your head. And then you'll know. Do not be me. There is no single mom of 45 with grown children right before she's perimenopausal hitting you up for some Netflix and chill. That's not what's happening. It is a trap. And you've fallen for it. We'll talk about this and more in the champagne room. Thank you guys very much. Again, wherever you are watching or listening to this show, there are links in the description to the book. And I